Good day, I'm Dr. T and welcome to my office. So this video is a little different than most. Normally when I do these videos, it's like, okay, so I've been doing this for 10 years. If you're new to the gig, here's something that is going to help you out. At least that's kind of the goal of the channel. This one is a little bit more, okay, here's something I'm starting. I don't know what I'm doing yet. I don't even know if I'm on the right track, but I think it's going to help my students. Okay, so while I was at Purdue in 2022, so this summer, it's still 2022. Doesn't feel like it, but it still is. One of the seminars I was at was on argument-driven inquiry. Now, this is something I've been wanting to kind of dabble in for years. The idea here is that if we're thinking about labs, especially the kind of the cookbook, cookie cutter labs, where the students are follow directions, do a thing. Those don't really have that many transferable skills. You could have, especially if you're going to be a chemist, this makes perfect sense. But if you're not going into the sciences at all, then, okay, what did the student learn from that lab? It may help reinforce certain lecture content, which is definitely very valuable. And that's kind of the standard justification of why lab exists. But what's kind of the general feedback we're getting from a lot of the other stakeholders, the business community, et cetera, is that it's less content that they need the students to learn. They need the students to learn content, but it's less content and it's much more critical thinking skills, communication skills, several other features that we're getting. But those are the kind of the two that I typically latch onto and think like, okay, here's something I can help with. Well, labs, if you think about it, especially if you did a doctoral research in one of the STEM fields, I mean, you were given a challenge. That was something that it's like, okay, this has literally never been done before. It's a little thing that's never been done before. It's something that's never been done before. And you had to figure out how to work through it, how to discover it, and then how to communicate your results with that. And, well, that's communication and critical thinking. Well, that took like 4 to 5 years. Could we condense this down into an afternoon kind of thing? Can we make a very miniature version of this? And so there's a couple of techniques, science writing heuristics, which is one I'd heard about in the past, argument-driven inquiry, which I think is still fairly old, but I've only recently been encountering it. They're both trying to set up this kind of same experience. Tell the students, like, here's your problem, and you need to work on figuring out how to solve the problem, how to discover what you need to discover, design the experiment, and then communicate that experiment. And they're both kind of focused in some respects around the communication step. Because if you know how you're going to communicate something, you work backwards. So backwards design, again, is kind of a huge deal in all of life. So if you know what kind of argument you need to set up, then you know what kind of evidence you need for that argument, and then you know what kind of experiment you need to do. So it's that kind of general idea. I'm doing a horrible job of explaining these because I'm not intimately familiar with them. I want to be, but I'm not. Now, both of these techniques involve completely overhauling labs. That's not something I'm really at a good spot to do right now. I've got a good set of labs. They work, but they're very cookie cutter. But one of the interesting features is that both SWH and ADI tends to often be compatible with a third technique that is somewhat smaller. This is called claims, evidence, and reasoning. And this is kind of right just as the argument phase. So you do the lab, and now here's the argument phase. And you're telling students to kind of set up a table. I'll put a graphic that I'm using up over here. And this is, kind of setting up for like some peer review, et cetera. So you tell students, okay, make a claim. Your claim is the answer to the question that was posed in the lab. So for instance, I just did this for the first time. I just graded things. It was an interesting grading experience. But that lab, they were given a metal rod. They were told to identify it. They could do density. They could do specific heat. And you could just look at the thing. They were supposed to do like all three. Now, a lot of the SWH ADI approaches are to not give too many detailed directions. These were non-chemistry majors. These were non-science majors. I felt that I needed to give them directions for this particular one because I was only covering this in 2-3 hours. So, I'm not giving them 2 weeks kind of things to do this. I'm giving them 2 to 3 hours. So I didn't want to jump in with that. But with the claims evidence reasoning, as you're going through, you're doing the experiment, you can then look back on the experiment and, okay, now we're going to really kick in the critical thinking. You've done the experiment. Okay, what is your metal? So you found a density, you found a specific heat, you've looked at it. There's a table in the back of the lab book that's got a bunch of specific heats and a bunch of densities. Okay, so obviously you're going to look at it, see what matches, etc. But let's actually kind of structure this a bit. And so the idea is now the students make the claim, so their metal rod is iron. And then on one side, you've got a listing of the evidence. So this would be things like the experimentally determined density, the literature value for the density of iron, the experimentally determined specific heat, the literature values of a specific heat for iron. What does the metal rod look like? What would an iron rod look like? And on the other side is a rationale. So this is kind of structuring it to help students structure an argument, to help them better communicate ideas, and to be able to help structure their ideas so they're thinking through ideas kind of here. And so then, you'd have topics such as, well, the specific heat was close to that of iron, but a bit lower. However, if it had cooled off, then the experimental specific heat would be a little too low. So this is very consistent. The densities are within 2%. It had rust on it. None of the other choices would have had rust on it. That kind of stuff, because, iron rusts. So stuff like that. And so the idea is to structure it. And so I tried that out the first time. I kind of explained the concept of what was going on. Now, ideally, and I didn't have time, I need to rebuild this lab so it has more time. It's got a part of the lab that is like half of a good lab. So it's a two-part lab. One is on freezing point. One is on specific heat. And the freezing point lab is half of a good lab. So I just need to get rid of it, because I'm not going to expand it to a full freezing point depression lab, which is what it should be. Okay, so the feedback, kind of going over and grading these, ideally the students would have had a phase where they would have written this out on like a whiteboard, and I've got those ready to go. And then they could have kind of gone around, talked with each other, and like, okay, but you don't have any reasoning for this, or, well, what about this evidence, that kind of stuff. So I think a peer review step, which is normally kind of critical to SWH and ADI, is something that I was missing and something that I should have had. Because I was looking at them, some of them had great, just basically what I described. Beautiful evidence and reasonings. The rationale made perfect sense. Others just didn't do it, which, okay, guys, you lost some points because not only did you have 3 hours, I let you turn it in the next week. And then, but others, had evidence of, the evidence was, well, they're close. Like, okay, that's not evidence. You need to structure the argument. So next time I'm going to be, discussing more about how to do this. And I think I'm going to try and get time for that peer review if I can. I think I'll have time. I'm planning for this for like the week after next. Yeah, week after next is the hope for that. So it's an interesting idea. I'm trying not to overhaul the labs because that's just not something I can do right now. I'm working overload. There's a reason there's been so few videos. And I still want to do this, though. I still want to jump in and really improve this and get much more transferable skills. And I'm hoping the claims evidence reasoning approach is going to really help my students. That's the goal. So with that said, this is going to end a weird video because, once again, I don't know what I'm doing yet. Hopefully soon. So if this sounds like an interesting idea for you, please go ahead and check it out. If you find any good resources, check those in the description, because I'm still trying to find good resources. Unlike Specs Grading, I haven't found the book. By the way, Specs Grading, it's going great so far. I've been doing it, this is the second time around with it, and it's going pretty good. But anyways, so with that said, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in later videos.